At eye level, have you ever used sound to articulate moments in sentiment privately? We create our conjurations and art as windows into ourselves that we didn't know we might have needed window enough to contemplate. Those catharses mediate our moments of articulation, and how they are otherwise the attempts to reconcile or affirm parts of our experience. It's such a reciprocating part of our lives and how it's expression of that which understands more than it speaks, as language goes one might say. What the paradigm of the shift in psychosocial, notional and peripheral literacy did was take language here in a much more literal sense as far as musical culture goes. In fact, it was rather communicating via articulation and sound and imagery. This is perhaps an initial quality of what would become less rudimentary but defining. This is the state of our subculture about to be multilateral between us. This was not the only thing happening, obviously. This in any other time would have probably been synonym with a propaganda machine, were it not for the element of how describingly projected from periphery and interpretation it was in an intersectional sustaining by consciousnesses between generations. And I try to say that with serious comprehensibility. I'd like to just note just how much of a very dimension time this was, engagement from that which might introspect. Psychological spectrum discovered for him as well as several other engagements as that which was outside and between and around was suddenly strange. In fact, an optimism and resignation of what was unexplainable and the allure of how it seemingly implied an interconnection, if not a reciprocation. It was new. See Rule the World by Walk Off the Earth. A youthful foreshadowing into what would age with a seriousness later. I'd prefer to be simultaneously eye level and informal about this, as it spans subject matter, confluence and complexity in every medium and level of human engagement, and getting into this requires that I be catering to cultural reference. That may seem flighty, but it's part of a psychological history. But for now I'm just talking about music. An insinuation of this sort about the linguistic developed from elsewhere. I'll be frank, there's a rambunctiousness of psychologies at play here, and it kinda snowballed out of our creative statements, in mid to late 2015 and would intimately continue to be conversationally qualitative in the coming years. But without beating around the bush, I used to compose with keyboards, I would have been very impassioned, and my psychology emulated much of its cavalier creative statement during a difficult schizoactive episode. My mouth to your ears. I find sense in the absurdity of that anomalousness and that it was questions of reality and cognition that left something needing being said. Maybe the world after can still say things to itself then. I certainly did. Maybe there is more to say to ourselves given what the time meant to the record anyways. But it's the truth otherwise. Should you be at that point in your life where the relationship to your moments as they are personal and every other moment in between, are their own, these moments complement themselves when you have them, and in the eye of the beholder so to speak, they are yours. To be at that point where youth is relating to and seeking their moments in the exploratory parts of their lives is less possessive for me at least. All the same, I'm mindful of my relationships to moments now, a more listening stance, but I still kept compliments to moments and absolute introspections close to me, for pretty much the entirety of my time here. The fact that this should reflect the nature of another person in general and psychological aptitude is the apology I owe to that. That and the crackdown on torrenting. Several cultural mediums including film, came to represent nodal expressions of a time's momentum and level of exchange, and on the conceptually receptive. A rabble-rousing was being drawn upon, and what films were made, I noticed exhibited a multi-leveled intergenerationally perceiving play on the fears and reasonings of interpreters at the time. One remembers conflict and depiction of conflict in something within the interpreting of a culture and reinterpreted, and it at the very least wasn't always undercultural, but it was not always gracious, but it was a multifaceted and inquiring time here as well. There was an intelligence, of a sort. Forms of control and antagonistic sexisms, analogies of unknowns. Many issues were explored. Thriller and sci-fi are cornerstones either way. The internet's own independent expressions of this, emulating a psychology in motion more intimately I think. Anomaly and origin, what was affecting this, and the psyche that would define this subculture, was ambiguous and consequential. This time also harbored a sense of the anomalous at that. But there was a gravitating of sort. I'd like to note that I understand that my personal moments and my personal windows into them, remain so. One didn't need to always feel invalidated given how one knows them. But this whole element was also sustained by the creative governments of the humans that were being so, I've always appreciated that point, I've witnessed it as such. That being said, I went into this gravitating around me knowing that eventually it would stop, and the ways that human is going to be discussion about itself, as it were, will continue being so, as art is always in humans' house. That being said, the early hours of the first events, barely extended into all cultures just yet, but it did resonate and reciprocate actively, and it was beginning to spread. These things are symptomatic of a psychologically active people. I would really like to put an actual face to this commentary's nature now. Firstly, I exist out of predation in life. I have died a social death, and as blind spot amidst reality perceived.